Hi everyone. My name is Mike and I'm happy to welcome you to Money channel. Here, despite the visual non-seriousness, we talk about serious things. Today I'd like to discuss a topic that hasn't lost its relevance for almost 2 years. From everywhere we hear only one thing: oil, gas, metals, wheat are more valuable than ever, commodities. Supercycle of commodities. And no, this is not Donald Trump's new election campaign. This is what the well-respected investment banks and analytical agencies are claiming. Please stop. I have had a lot of interest in economic cycle theory, and it gives quite unambiguous conclusions on this subject. I decided to share them if you are interested in this topic. Let's start with the fundamentals. Classical economic theory distinguishes 4 different cycles, depending on the factors that cause them and their duration. First, the Kitchin cycle. It is based on regular changes of business activity every 1 to 2 years. The full cycle, recession and the subsequent recovery gives us 2 to 4 years. Originally, Kitchin associated this phenomenon with changes in gold reserves, but with the advent of gold standards, it became clear that gold has no effect on these changes. Subsequently, economists realized that this cycle was caused by local changes in the balance of supply and demand, and subsequent changes in the capacity utilization rate, and the volume of foreign trade. Juglar cycle. It begins when the problem of changes in supply and demand cannot be solved by an increase in production load or foreign trade. This triggers the investment process in order to build new capacities to meet the growing demand. Then the cycle will look like this: at some moment the market realizes that more production facilities are needed. Making the investment decision, all the necessary approvals, construction, and reaching the planned capacity usually takes up to 5 years. Over the next few years, it becomes clear that there were a lot of smart investors and the market is overflowing with the same goods. Then the reverse process is triggered. The most inefficient plants begin to close, the supply decreases, and at some point the cycle repeats itself exactly. The duration of such processes is estimated at 7 to 11 years. Kuznets cycle or swing. Now let's think, what can cause this sharp increase in demand, triggering the investment processes of the previous cycle? In fact, there can only be 2 options here: either a rapid growth of the population, or an increase in its wealth. Simon Kuznets paid attention to population cycles, an observation that earned him a Nobel Prize in economics. He revealed that first the influx of migrants into America and then the emergence of the next generations of these migrants is precisely at the heart of Kuznets' cycle. Obviously, in this context, the length of this cycle is somewhere between 15 and 25 years. However, he did his research in the 20s of the last century, analyzing data from the 19th century, where migration flows were indeed extremely active. Later, economists realized that the figure of 20 to 25 years is important not only because of the change of generations, but also as an average time of dilapidation of many structures. Thus, now it is the renewal of infrastructure that is considered to be the main driving force of the Kuznets cycle. And here it is no longer fundamental, at the expense of its dilapidation or at the expense of the need for its improvement and expansion, taking into account population growth. Kondratiev cycles, or waves. Another reason for a fundamental change in the balance of supply and demand is the growth of human welfare. Usually the rapid growth of human welfare occurs as a result of the Industrial Revolution. That is, when some new technology appears, which allows for a rapid and massive increase in productivity. Thus, Kondratiev noticed that the invention of the loom and then the steam engine caused approximately the same movements in the economy and divided them into 4 phases. The first phase corresponds to economic growth associated with the introduction of inventions and discoveries. This phase is characterized by high inflation and rising interest rates. The second phase is the top of the cycle and the peak of industry. It is usually accompanied by a high level of liberalism in the economy. Historically, the second phase has also been associated with world wars and other cataclysms, and thus with a significant number of government contracts. In terms of technological development, this period is characterized mainly by improvements rather than new developments. In the third phase, the commodity market is oversaturated and the economy is overheated. There may be some residual growth caused by cost-cutting, but this no longer affects the global trend. Eventually, competition becomes more acute, and protectionism appears in the form of, for example, customs restrictions. Interest rates go down. The fourth and final phase is a depression in the economy. GDP growth slows down considerably or even stops altogether. Interest rates are low, but lending is still at lows. Inflation is low, due to a lack of demand for goods and services. This is the worst phase of the economic cycle, but usually the most important scientific and technological discoveries are made during this period, which should be the impetus for moving forward and starting a new cycle. Thus, the first Kondratiev wave, associated with the advent of the loom, was observed in the first half of the 19th century. The second wave is associated with the emergence of the steam engine and occurred in the second half of the 19th century. The third wave is considered to be the emergence of heavy engineering, electric motors, the development of energy and inorganic chemistry, and it dates from the late 19th century to the mid-20th century. The fourth wave is the emergence of the internal combustion engine, the production of automobiles and other machines, and oil refining. It was observed from the end of World War II to 1980. The fifth wave is the development of electronics, robotics, computing, laser and telecommunications started in 1981 and was supposed to end a couple of years ago. Thus, the average duration of the Kondratiev waves is 35 to 50 years. However, any dating here is very approximate and is adjusted, among other things, depending on the country, since technological progress did not come in sync. Okay, that's cool, you might say. But what does this have to do with the supercycle of commodities? And you would be right, it has nothing to do with it at all. Moreover, the term supercycle is much more statistical than economic. The American financier Ralph Elliott came up with the theory of wave movement in financial markets. Initially, he singled out 8 waves which are constantly repeating, 5 of them are trending and 3 are counter-trending. Later, he actively analyzed how these waves could look like, and in fact, he became the ancestor of technical analysis in stock trading. So, in his theory, these cycles of 8 repeating waves are part of larger waves, and they, in turn, are part of larger waves, and so on. So he introduced concepts like cycle, supercycle, and even big supercycle. Thus, a supercycle of commodities is just a correlation of statistical regularities of Elliott from the stock market to the commodities market. Moreover, it is possible to speak about a supercycle only by averaging the price dynamics of a large number of different commodities, because their prices change very non-synchronously. This is the Bank of Canada's statistics on only 4 groups: metals, oil, agricultural products and livestock. Yes, there is definitely some correlation, but occasionally it can be very weak. 6 years ago, the Bank of Canada did a detailed study of supercycles, averaging the price dynamics of more than 20 commodity groups and calculating a single trend. According to their calculations, the average length of supercycles is about 30 years. And yes, it doesn't match any of the economic cycles, either in length or even in the dating of the start and end points. So why are we listening this, you ask? Look, if we compare when the new Kondratiev waves and the new commodity supercycles began, we see the following. That is, with the exception of 1933, when the commodity cycle was provided, most likely, exclusively by mass preparations for the World War and the exit of America from the Great Depression, all other commodity supercycles began about 10 to 15 years after the start of the next Kondratiev wave, that is, just in the second phase of the wave, when the maximum bloom of industry occurs. What is quite logical. And now we can return to the main question: has a new commodity supercycle begun, or not yet? According to various calculations, the last Kondratiev wave should have been replaced by a new one around 2018. As we remember, high inflation and high interest rates correspond to the first phase of the wave, which fully agrees with the forecasts about the end of the previous wave several years ago. Thus, if we draw conclusions from the theory of economic cycles, we have about 10 more years to wait for a real commodity supercycle. On the other hand, I already explained that each commodity actually has its own real cycle. I am sure, for example, that the lithium or palladium supercycle started several years ago. But once again I remind you of the chain of events. First, a new technology appears, and its implementation accelerates the growth of demand and investment. And it is probably obvious to everyone which new technology boosts demand for lithium or palladium. But in the case of classic commodities like oil, it is not clear which new technology can accelerate demand for it. For example, it may be due to some dramatic increase in the number of flights due to space tourism. I have no other ideas so far, so please share your hypotheses in the comments. What could it be? Although personally I would prefer oil to quietly live out its life without any supercycles in favor of renewable energy sources, but soon we will see how it will actually be. And that's it for today. Be sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more economic theories and financial breakdowns coming up here soon. And, of course, press the bell. Bye, everyone.